Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Milken Institute Global Conference. I'm joined by some of the best investors in the world. So good to see your all's faces. I want to start, it would behoove us to start with a market outlook. We have some really great global-minded investors. I want to start with Roger. Roger, why don't you tell us what you're thinking about? A jobs report came out on Thursday. We'd love to see how you feel about it in terms of inflationary concerns.
So look, I think a number of points. One is the economy itself is doing really well, so we should celebrate that. We're still creating jobs roughly at an average around 200,000 or so every report average. So that's good news. Second piece of good news, inflation has certainly been coming down, which is very good. Now the challenge, inflation has not come down enough to say we're comfortably towards the Fed's target, therefore interest rates are likely to remain higher for a period of time. And the possibility of a cut, I think, now is 50-50. The final point, though, from an investment standpoint, is there's always room to find, great ideas. We see private credit, for example, growing rapidly. There are a number of friends here from Andalusian that's doing well in that space. Alternatives and other kinds of alternatives are driving some investment opportunities as well. So think, obviously, venture. And the markets themselves have been holding up pretty well. So I'd say while there's some challenges, there's still lots of opportunities to do well in markets, public, private, traded, et cetera.
Fantastic, fantastic. I want to go to Carla. Carla, you say you are a glass half full kind of woman. So how are you feeling about the market?
Yes, I have to tell you, I concur with Roger in terms of the opportunity, especially in the private markets. There are a couple things that will make me feel that way. Number one, the public markets are now starting to open up, which obviously changes everybody's risk profile, the fact that there can be a public market exit. And it's very different than it was in 23 and 22. But the other thing is there are a number of private companies that survived the COVID era, if you will. And I think that there are great opportunities on the private side for those companies that, quote, made it through, because that tells you something about that founder, that tells you something about that business plan, and that tells you something about the opportunity. And many of those companies now are raising capital, and from an investor standpoint, selfishly, many of those companies are raising capital at a lower valuation, which is not good for the companies, but if you're an investor, you should be paying attention, especially for some of these entrepreneurs of color that were funded in the 19 and 20 year rounds.
Yeah. Martin, in the world of investment management, how are you feeling about that?
Well, look, my view is the economy, I think, overall is healthy. I think the outlook is positive for us. There is a lot of disruption, though. There's still technological disruption and more on the horizon. There's macroeconomic and demographic disruption. There's regulatory disruption. So the challenge, I think, for us as a firm, the way we look at the world is how do we sort of sift through that disruption and find out where value creation is going to go. Where are the little pockets of opportunity that give you a chance to create outsized return? We're just looking at that thing broadly. We can hope to do average, but we're not trying to be average. We're trying to be above average. And so finding out sort of what those micro dynamics are, where the pockets of opportunity will be, and where real value will be created is the challenge.
Fantastic. Nisha, you are a global investor, right, at the Development Finance Corporation. So I'm curious, what you're seeing from a regional perspective. Are there any hotspots you're concerned about?
Well, we're still recovering from the aftershocks of the pandemic. And so while the outlook here in the United States is quite strong, the global picture is a little bit uneven. We're very focused on the emerging markets, where you're seeing a lot of countries that are struggling with a very heavy debt burden, and where FDI still hasn't kicked in. So part of what we're trying to do is de-risk capital going into some of these emerging markets. One of the things that I think represents an opportunity is that while we're focused from a kind of strategic perspective of de-risking supply chains, that de-risking and diversification represents an opportunity through nearshoring, friendshoring, to build more supply chain capacity in the long term and some investments in the short term.
Okay. This word capitalism has gotten a bad rep over the last few years, maybe even the last 20 years. I'm curious how you all are redefining capitalism, how you all are thinking about it, how it's becoming more inclusive, what needs you all are seeing in terms of kind of rebranding that word capitalism. I'll start at Marty at the end. Give me some thoughts there.
Yeah, look, I think capitalism and democracy combine to create the greatest socioeconomic construct in the history of the world, right? But they're not perfect. And we see that all over the world. We see the broadening wealth gap. We see gridlock in democracy. But look, we invented these institutions to make ourselves more wealthy, safer, have a better quality of living. And if we made it up, we can fix it. We can change it. And so my view is that we got to tweak the priorities that we have in capitalism. It's just not about shareholder value. It's just not about economic wealth for owners. It's about the strength and stability of the society around that. The strong societies are the goose that lays the golden egg. And so the way we invest ought to consider people having clean water and clean air, access to health care, better education so they have access to greater economic opportunities. If we don't invest in that infrastructure, there will be pitchforks and torches. And when we started Vistria 10 years ago, that was part of our pitch. We cannot continue on this path of exclusion. We have to include. If we don't, it will be pitchforks and torches. And shortly after, what did we have? You had Black Lives Matter, you had George Floyd, you had women's marches, you had the insurrection. We all need to invest in that stability. If we don't have strong, stable communities, then the platform for us to invest is weaker and the returns are less attractive.
Yeah. Carla, at Morgan Stanley, you've spent so much of your time focused on this. You have an incredible podcast on it. You speak all over the world on these issues. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I agree that this is a time like we have never seen before. This is an opportunity for all of us to participate in redefining what capitalism looks like. And that's part of what I was trying to do 6 or 7 years ago when we started the Multicultural Innovation Lab. None of us have ever lived on the other side of a global pandemic. None of us have ever seen the kind of social unrest that we've seen on the back of racial inequities in this country and frankly around the world. It is a blank sheet of paper moment for us to redefine what capitalism looks like. And I would argue that when the word came into existence, and I agree with you, if man created it, man can fix it, right? And no one was sort of thinking about inclusivity and equity. But now we know what we know, and as the great Maya Angelou said, when you know better, you do better, right? And we now know better. So as we redefine what it looks like, there has to be a measure of equity and inclusivity put in there. And again, if we want to get to the basic definition, you know, one of the things that I say all the time, it's not black, it's not white, it's green, right? So we can't speak language on either side of the aisle. We can agree on what capitalism should look like in terms of return for all. And that was one of the reasons that we started the Multicultural Innovation Lab, was because we saw a real opportunity. Nobody was investing in this space. And it wasn't about doing well or doing good, because frankly, that's one of the reasons that I believe that we haven't pushed D&I further, is because it was a good thing to do, the right thing to do. And as human beings, we might not agree on the right thing to do or the human thing to do, but as commercial animals, we will agree on what that thing is. And here I thought, nobody's investing. As an investor, you should go where no man or woman have gone before. What happens if we put the full weight of our firm, and more importantly, our convening power, to bring other great corporations to the table to invest in companies that were founded by women and people of color, and not only add the money, but add the know-how, add the technology, add the people, add the things that we know that it takes to get to a public market or a private market exit. And that was one of the reasons that we started it. And part of the reason that we did the podcast, frankly, Troy, was to elevate the conversation around the inequity in the distribution of capital to women and people of color. And it's been interesting to see the response on the back of that podcast as people started to normalize the language and understand this inequity. And I think we have to do a lot more of that if we're going to actually make any progress in redefining capitalism this time around.
You've done that all within Morgan Stanley. You've expanded to a fund. Tell us a little bit more about
That's exactly
the fund.
right. So we started first with an in-house incubator, well, not an incubator, an accelerator. So companies that already, had a proven product, we would bring them in and we'd give them three things. We'd give them cash in exchange for a single-digit percentage of the company. we had a carefully curated curriculum to take them from being a founder to a CEO, because as y'all know, there is a difference, right? And then we would also connect them to some of our larger investment banking clients to accelerate the scaling of their business. That was the lab. But one of the things that we learned after 4 or 5 years in the lab is that there was still a death valley around that Series A. While you might be able to get the pre-seed, the seed, the post-seed money, there was still a dearth of capital available for that real growth capital, that patient capital that you need at the Series A level, which is why we started the Next Level Fund. And that fund was really more like a club deal where we brought in major corporations, a Walmart, a Microsoft, a Hearst Labs, to not only write the check, but also to add their distinctive superpowers to whatever that company's needs might be. So if it was a fintech company, all day long, we disproportionately invested our time, talent, and resources. If it was media communications, then that was Hearst. If it was retail related, then that would be a Walmart. All things technology, software, hardware was a Microsoft. And again, we think companies can do more than just write the check if you really want to create value for some of these early stage entrepreneurs, because they have needs, I have learned the hard way, they have needs that are beyond their capital needs in order to be successful.
Very good. Roger, you spent some 15 years at TIAA, focused on a lot of these issues. You had a very broad base of retirees that you were responsible for. You do some stuff around the Inclusive Capitalism Council. Now, I'm curious to hear how you're thinking about some of these things.
So 2 or 3 points. First, yes, we're at a point where the reputation for capitalism has certainly been tarnished. First, I think about it in sort of an economic history sense. This is not the first time that people have called into question the value of capitalism. When capitalism first got it started, it was pretty rough and tumble, right? Child labor laws didn't exist. Work week didn't exist. There was all this discussion, and rightly so, of tainted food. Novels are being written in America. And what happened? Capitalism actually fixed itself. Fixed itself by bringing in some new regulation. Capitalists themselves changed a little bit. So in the US, think, Teddy Roosevelt, progressive movement. And in some ways sort of saved capitalism. Then we had another great crisis in capitalism called the Great Depression. Teddy's cousin, FDR, comes in, fixes things again. Here in the US, we had a period of time when the most impoverished population was old folks over 65. Johnson comes in, Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera. So I say all this to say capitalism has had these moments when it has been under threat. It's had these moments when the outcomes have been very negative. And the reason to be optimistic is we sort of tend to have a self-correction device about capitalism. And so now we're in what I think of as capitalism 3.0. What does that look like, to your point? Those who control capital, those who are controlling investments, have to think very much about the kinds of things that we just heard from the other panelists here. So yes, it is certainly about making a good return, but it's also very importantly about thinking about the question of, are you being rewarded for the risk you take? So TIA was known and still is known for doing a lot of ESG kind of investing. That's now sort of an ugly word, and people hide under tables when they talk about it. But no, it shouldn't be. It is basically getting a return for the risk that you're taking in environmental, social, or governance issues. Because you think about some of the biggest failures in capitalism and in our lives, Enron, WorldCom, et cetera, failures of governance, et cetera. Other big failures have to do with massive oil spills, for example. So capitalism should be thinking about getting a return for ESG kind of risks, or getting superior rewards, if in fact you're getting superior social outcomes. So at TIA, the company was started because Andrew Carnegie in 1918 looked around up at Cornell and said some of the world's best thinkers are retiring into poverty, couldn't retire. So he used capitalist tools, investing for return, pooling capital, creating a new concept called the annuity. And now, 107 years later, that company manages $1.4 trillion of assets. When I became the CEO, it was $469 billion, and when I left, it was roughly 1.3, 1.4. 5 million Americans, and during all these crises, stagflation, Great Depression, during my time, the Great Financial Crisis, George Floyd, et cetera, never once missed a retirement payment. Not one teacher in America, or anyone who's participated with us, has had any ups and downs because of these issues. And the answer is they bring, still think of it as we/they, they bring very sophisticated asset management capabilities. to bear to solve a big social problem. And I'm really proud, and a couple of my colleagues from Andalusia are here, part of what they do that I started and has been working out really well is in fact in the private credit market. It has given phenomenally good returns, 10, 12, 13% kind of returns for all these folks who invest. So, the point I'm making is capitalism has swung back and forth. It has tended to fix itself. Point two, the tools of capitalism can help solve social problems. Think of the retirement question. But point three, we should not take this for granted because, in fact, the way people have organized themselves economically, we've had feudalism, we've had mercantilism, capitalism is a relatively new event, and so we shouldn't assume that it's going to be here 200 years from now, and as those of us who are capitalists get focused in on making it much more inclusive in the ways that we've been talking about. I stand down.
Alicia, can you tell us a little bit more about the Development Finance Corporation? And I'm curious if you, within that, can also give the context for promoting financial markets around the world.
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, let me just say I'm in radical agreement with everything that my co-panelists are saying, but I would actually extrapolate it to the global scene, which is that as we think about global growth, I think Muhammad Yunus has a phrase that he likes to say, which is the poor are not a problem to be solved, but actually an opportunity to be unleashed, right? And emerging markets, frontier markets, represent incredible opportunity. So Development Finance Corporation, our predecessor you might have heard of was OPIC, the Overseas Private Insurance Corporation. That was much more focused on supporting U.S. private investment overseas with the Congress basically about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, decided we needed to overhaul and create a more robust tool for the United States to bring development finance from the United States to the global stage. Partly because authoritarian state capital was dominating that space and was not creating the kind of impact that we thought should be unleashed. So Development Finance Corporation comes along with a more robust set of tools and a mandate to look at some of the pressing challenges that we see globally and advance solutions and advance financing to address those solutions. And we bring the debt financing, political risk insurance, equity investment, technical assistance to the game. We have an overall maximum exposure cap of $60 billion, which is twice what our predecessor agency had. And we have been, over these last 4 years, moving aggressively into that space so that right now our overall exposure is about $44 billion. And I would say the vast majority of that is focused in low-income, lower middle-income countries, although we're also in a number of upper middle-income countries as well. Our fastest growing demand is for political risk insurance, which if you look around the world today, I think makes a little bit of sense. And so
tell us how political risk insurance works.
Sure. So we essentially deploy our PRI to insure debt, to insure projects against political risk, risk of expropriation, war risk, risk of currency inconvertibility, and that helps private capital go into markets where otherwise they would hesitate to go in. We provide that risk insurance that says that you can go ahead and deploy that loan capital. We will cover the risk of that if the government expropriates that project. You can file the claim and we will cover that risk. Yeah. That has been hugely successful, and it takes up about 18% of our overall portfolio right now, but like I said, it is a high demand, fast growing tool. But we're also providing a lot of portfolio guarantees to banks to help them on lend to communities, underserved communities that otherwise may not be able to access capital. Farmers in Africa, migrants in Colombia or in Latin America, to be able to give them that ability to have an affordable living, to be able to build their enterprise, and to stabilize those communities so that we're not seeing out-migration. We're Also, now with the Build Act, with DFC, we have the ability to do early stage equity investing. And this is still a little bit of an imperfect tool for us, but it's been hugely important in allowing us to invest in enterprises in emerging markets that right now don't have access to capital. It allows us to invest in funds, again, at early stages that allows them to do their capital raise. So tools that are allowing us to really help shape some of these markets in which we're operating. And then finally, I'll say a couple of areas that we're very focused. Climate and helping address, the needs across the world and being able to support an energy transition and being able to support increased access to financing, climate financing to support their energy security, as well as some of the adaptation to climate change, so that we're looking at agriculture and the needs there. And the other is inclusion, right? So this is a cross-cutting issue for us across all of our investments. We look at how we can ensure that the financing that we're providing is actually creating inclusive economic growth opportunities. And I will say that since its inception, DFC has put $10 billion in financing that is focused on particularly women's access to capital, women-led enterprises, women's access to employment, et cetera.
Yeah, thank you so much. Martin, you have focused for the last 10 years at Vistria specifically on impact, right? I'm curious to see how you've seen that market evolve for the last 10 years. I know it's grown. I think it's over $1 trillion in assets now. So tell us a little bit about what you've seen evolve in that space.
Well, let me start by saying, we started the firm, and I think my co-founder, Kip Kirkpatrick, is out there. We started the firm. The founding thesis was, how do we make money, right? We're in the business of making money. And so recognizing through our own personal experiences that at the intersection of public and private interest, there's an opportunity, right? Companies that not only serve customers and employees and investors, but also the broader community should be worth more. They'll be supported by policy over the long term. Revenue should be more stable. EBITDA should be less volatile, should trade at higher multiples. The other thing that we realized was that capitalists have this survival instinct. And when we realize that it's in our own long-term economic interest to invest in the stability of this thing we call society, we will do it. And so Kip and I said, man, like if we can make money making the world a better, more stable place, we're going to make a lot of money while the world becomes a better, more stable place. And our objective and our goal was to drive great returns. And so we did that, investing in healthcare, in knowledge and learning solutions, and financial services, and made great returns. And we saw, as capitalists do, a lot of imitation. A lot of more players entered the marketplace and started driving great returns. Big capital allocators starting to recognize that it's in their interest to invest in this discipline. And so part of our goal was to create that kind of viral dynamic in the space, and certainly it is played out. And some of the social events that happened in the last 10 years helped to validate the need for us to pursue this practice.
You said big capital allocators have focused on it. How have you seen capital allocators shift their perspective on either impact investing or this kind of holistic view on the ecosystem?
Well, look, I mean, I think they recognize the value of stability in these industries. I think these three industries are foundational to any strong and stable economy, and recognize
Martin,
what
tell
their
us what those
interest is.
industries are.
Healthcare, knowledge and learning solutions, and financial services. A huge proportion of GDP, and I think cornerstones to any great economy. And so they've just identified those industries as a priority, right? And identified impact as a priority because, you talk about capital allocators that have trillions of dollars to invest along the whole economic continuum, recognizing that if people are marching in the streets, if people don't have access to great education or job opportunities, then there's going to be less opportunity to deliver outsized returns or to achieve outside returns. So we've just seen the whole space evolve, people getting more sophisticated about how they think about these opportunities, how it fits into their portfolio construction, and making it a real priority, invest behind an impact thesis.
Very good. Our friends in the booth are going to put the QR code for our Q&A and resources. If you're interested in asking our audience a question, please do so using that code, and it'll come to me on this iPad right here.
Hey, Troy, can I add something to what Martin said? To your question about impact and how it's changed. About 15 years ago, which is when I think people really started talking about ESG, everyone was focused at first on the environment and the kind of investments people were making. Oh, don't invest in tobacco, don't invest in firearms and alcohol. That's where it sort of started. And then, people started talking more about the environment. And then when we get to 2019, 2020, especially on the back of the murder of George Floyd, for me, the S now all of a sudden became the D. Everybody was really talking about diversity, and you were starting to see a lot of activism by institutional shareholders asking their public companies that they've already invested in, what are you doing there? What does your management team look like? Talk to us about your practices. And then, interestingly enough, over the last year or so, you don't hear that conversation as much as you heard it before. There was also a big focus on governance. And I would argue that that is still in focus when people are thinking about impact, because now you see more companies being very thoughtful about how they lay out their board of directors in their proxy statement. What are the not only the requirements, but what's the profile of the board, and do they have this kind of experience? Do they have global experience? Do they have government experience? Those kinds of things. So you can see the shift in terms of how companies are answering institutional queries about who's sitting around that board table. So for me, as I think about your question about how impact investing is evolving, that's one of the shifts that I see.
Yeah, and you aren't necessarily focused on impact investing, but you've done some incredible work around emerging managers at Morgan Stanley specifically. Talk us through that work.
Yeah, back in I'd say the 2008, 2009 time period, my timing couldn't have been worse because I was right around the time, obviously, that the financial services crisis happened. We were trying to put together a fund that would invest in emerging managers. And back then, the definition of emerging manager broadly was any asset manager that had less than $1 billion under management, but the prevailing definition was women and minority-owned asset managers pretty much across all asset classes. And obviously my decision to do that was in the summer of 2008. I don't need to tell y'all what happened in September, right, of 2008. But interestingly enough, it gave me the opportunity to go out and talk to people like Cheryl and others about what we were trying to do. And we were trying to put together a fund that would, invest in these asset managers, but give them more money than what was normally happening in the market. Because what would happen, and the reason why there was such a conundrum around emerging managers, is no asset allocator wanted to be more than 20% of somebody's assets under management. Well, if you only had, $50 million under management, then that means the most they could give you were $10 million. And even if you shot the lights out in your performance, it wouldn't make the difference in their portfolio returns. So there were a lot of things that I learned over the couple of years of trying to ultimately raise that fund, which we did not raise, by the way. But what was interesting is that a number of institutions that we approached said, okay, if you're not going to go forward with the fund, then will you invest this along this strategy in a separately managed account, which we were able to do, which is how we were able to put our foot in the water there. But I would argue that there's still a challenge for emerging managers as defined as women and minority-owned asset managers to get out here and raise this capital. Because at the end of the day, if you're talking to a large institution, there's normally a consultant. And then it's difficult to get the consultant to pay attention to you unless the client, the asset allocator, then tells the consultant to pay attention. And what it took me a long time to figure out, there was no real reason why the consultants needed to pay attention when they already had 50 managers that they were monitoring on behalf of their client. Why should they take the time to actually diligence another? So it's a vicious little circle, and you need something to interrupt that, which is what we were hoping to do in order for these managers to really get any critical amount of capital. And it's difficult. As I said, here we are in 2024, and I was on this journey in 2008, 9, and 10, and it's still difficult. And somebody has to break the mold in terms of what it takes to actually fund one of these managers very early on for there to be any change in the industry?
Yeah, we at the Institute and the Knight Foundation and McKinsey all pegged that number. About 1.4% of $87 trillion assets under management are controlled and by women and minority-owned firms. So it's a challenge that we're continuing trying to solve. Roger, I want to go to you about technology. You spent your career at McKinsey early on, and you worked on the internet, then the intranet. I'm curious about how you see technology over the next 10 or 20 years are going to really transform in the ways that the internet and the intranet did then.
Oh, look, I'm like all of us, a techno-optimist with also some concerns, obviously. So the next big thing already is AI. We've already seen, particularly in healthcare and other sectors, that AI has been totally transformative. You know, one of the other things I do is I work with another group called Red Cell Partners, where we incubate and fund companies. And in that portfolio, we've got 4 or 5 companies that are driving down cancer solutions, drug expansion using AI, big data. And so I'm very optimistic that the next big thing, call it AI, may have some risks, but I think it has some real opportunities to solve a number of these social problems. We've seen it already in healthcare. You can certainly see it already in financial inclusion, et cetera. So very excited about that. The other thing I'm excited about beyond that kind of technology is this thing called financial engineering. So one of the things I find really fascinating, having been a capitalist all my life and having studied capitalism for a long time, is the ability of the markets to create new tools to solve some of these problems. And so one of the big problems that you're talking about is climate change. Well, there's a market out there for what's called climate offset or carbon offset. So companies that say, I want to get my carbon footprint down to 0, first thing you do is you reduce the amount of carbon you produce yourself in your industry. Then you can also buy what's called an offset. So now there's an entire new market that's emerging for these voluntary carbon offsets. And here I'm going to do a shameless ad for my wife. So when you run into her, you tell I said this. So my wife, Annette Nazareth, has been driving something called the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets. At the request of the G7 governments, she has stood up over the last 2 years with her team an ability to have basically a self-regulated organization around these voluntary carbon markets. And what is it happening? What's happening there? It's allowing big companies, often in the north, to buy offsets that are often in the global south. And so reducing overall carbon by creating basically carbon sinks in parts of the world that take carbon out of the atmosphere and bury it for long periods of time in the ground. And they've also done something else, which is creating what we're now calling green-collar jobs. So people in the global south who are now working in these spaces. And so it's a twofer. And I'm really excited about this, not just for my personal reason of watching my wife do these phenomenal things, but for our society to recognize that the tools of capitalism, private investment, creating new financial tools can lead to these very positive social outcomes. So that's the second kind of technology. It's not sort of AI, it's financial engineering aimed at these target issues. And the final thing that's very, very exciting, obviously, we've seen this for a period of time, is the communication revolution, particularly happening in Africa and other places, where, the cell phone, low, not high-tech cell phones, are creating massive abilities of financial inclusion, allowing people to take their commodities to market, allowing individuals to, get small and medium-sized loans, et cetera. So we have this whole world of financial inclusion being driven by basically the cell phone. So I'm pretty excited about the technologies that I'm seeing, that all of us are seeing, AI, financial engineering, communication, cell phone, et cetera. And there've got to be 50 others that I haven't talked about, right? So there's also, I'm involved a little bit with cancer treatment. There's this whole notion of using your own genomes and your own cells to create the attack on the cancer cell in your body. So you're getting their very focused, targeted healthcare. So that's just 3 or 4 of them. But and the good news for us who are capitalists is each one of these things has an opportunity to be both positive from a social impact, but also positive from an ROI impact. And so count me incredibly excited about living this period of time, because I think technologies and capital are going to help us solve some of these major problems that we've been dealing with.
Martin, I see you sitting up. Did you have thoughts?
Well, yeah, I agree with everything that the panelists say. I just wanted to come back to this point, like, I'm surprised, this conversation isn't happening in a bigger room in Staples Center, because this is what capitalists do. This is a dislocation in the markets.
Right.
This is an opportunity. This is a path to make money. And that's what we're in the business of doing. And I think everybody at this conference should be in this room. And when we talk about, diversity and inclusion and all that stuff, like, we're in the business of making money. And if I was starting a basketball team, I wouldn't pick 5 7-foot centers to put on the court on my team. I'd pick a 6-foot point guard and a 6'6" small forward. When we built our firm, we're just looking for the most talented people, no matter what color, gender, race they are. And it just, we're in the business of making money. And I like to pose that question. We're trying to make money. What are you trying to do, right? And so I really feel like the market has to understand, capital allocators have to understand that this is really a dislocation in the marketplace. Capitalists have a survival instinct. They know that there's a set of opportunities that's going to make the whole system better and create more opportunity. And we're trying to fill that niche, right? Find that opportunity. I just want to make sure that we come back to that point. Like, this is all just capitalism. We're not philanthropists. We're trying to make money. And I just think there's a real opportunity under all of these perspectives to make a really good risk-adjusted return.
Let me just add this, though, Troy. There needs to be some agreement on the base level that, talent is, in fact, evenly distributed, as my good friend Frida K. Klein says, but opportunity is not. Right. So I do think there has to be some level setting that if you are going to engage in capitalism, you therefore must agree that you have to have the best talent that's in the marketplace. So as you said, you wouldn't cherry pick the team, but you say best talent, that means I gotta look everywhere.
Right.
And that means I cannot be concerned about the box. No matter what the box looks like, if it's the best, that's what I want. Now, to go back to this whole idea of shareholder value, one of the things that I've been saying to people, especially in this environment that we're in now, where everybody's like, do we need to talk about it, right? Here's the deal. If you start with the fundamental thesis that your job as a public company is to create the best shareholder value, then you say that the way that we do that, our philosophy is to make sure that we pick the best players. And we know that those players are out there in all shapes and sizes. So we're going to create equity and equal access so that we have a shot to get the best talent so that we can create the highest shareholder value for our shareholders. That is why we care about making sure that we have all kinds of people in our organization, because that's our philosophy around how to get to the best returns. And I don't see where there's a debate in that thesis. And if people focus there, then we can have a kind of change. Then we can have the agreement around capitalism, because now you're saying that we need to have all kinds of players and we need to position ourselves as the person that's acquiring that talent to be able to get at it.
Nisha, I'm going to come to Nisha and come back to you, Roger.
So, what we're hearing is basically the business case for impact investing.
Absolutely.
Right? And that is equally true here in the United States as it is around the world. And, as we are investing in the infrastructure in emerging markets that is necessary to help create the economic growth, the physical infrastructure, the digital infrastructure, the energy infrastructure, we're also mindful that investing in that infrastructure also needs to be inclusive, create social sustainability, create environmental sustainability, climate sustainability, and that is going to create the return on the investment. And we're a development finance corporation. We're putting financing into quote unquote higher risk markets, and yet we are returning money to the Treasury every year. Yeah. We are not losing our shirts on these investments. We're actually making healthy returns on these investments, and we're, on our way to being self-financing even at the higher, exposure rates that we're pulling online. So the point that we're making is the problems, the challenges that we see are not going to be necessarily addressed by public financing. by themselves. We see that around the world. Countries are behind in their ability to meet the social development goals. But private capital coming in is going to actually help countries achieve their developmental targets and allow the investors to make returns on their investment.
Yeah. Roger?
So I've heard a lot of wisdom here on the panel. I'm going to take this to one other place. You mentioned something else that I've been involved in, which is called the Council for Inclusive Capitalism. And that is a group of now over 200 CEOs who have decided that they, in their positions as CEOs, who are, if you will, at sort of the top of a kind of the capitalist, part of the capitalist pyramid, have an obligation to think about, social impact, still making money, for sure. And so, as an example, when I was the CEO of TIA, I discovered that some of our employees in Denver were, not doing as well economically as they could because the cost of living in Denver had gone up. And these are some of our employees who are sort of mid-office, back office, not sort of the highly trained white-collar folks. But it was incumbent upon me to adjust their salaries and their wages to deal with the fact that they were living in what had proven to be a pretty high-cost neighborhood. And I didn't want anyone working full-time at TIA to be on the margin. And they were at risk of doing that because of the nature of Denver, which had been growing rapidly. And so that was one of the commitments that we made in this Council for Inclusive Capitalism. But other CEOs made other kinds of commitments as well. And so the reason I go down this path is this whole debate around diverse teams and inclusive teams. Every CEO I talk to your point, Carla, and also yours, wants this diverse team. So while people are attacking DE&I, in the boardroom and in the C-suite, the answer is, of course, I want a diverse team. To your point, if I'm going to build a great basketball team, I want a 5'7" Roger Ferguson who's a hot outside shooter. Just to bring it home. To where
Just to make sure we know,
Just make sure we know. No, but all joking aside, I say serious things in a funny way. Every CEO I know wants a diverse team, even if there's sort of incoming around diversity. They don't want groupthink. They want diversity. They don't want their companies to be on the wrong side of any of these topics. And so what I find fascinating about this whole discussion of inclusive capitalism or woke capitalism, it's not coming from the C-suite, it's not coming from the boardroom, it's coming from politicians who for their own purposes sort of ginning this up. And so, one of the reasons I'm optimistic about this is the folks who actually are controlling capital, not just the asset allocators, not just the asset managers, but people who are running big companies, are also thinking in this way. They want their companies to invest in the right way, get a good return, bring diverse folks to the room. So, while I've seen capitalism swing back and forth, if I look at the work of this inclusive capitalism, all these CEOs, they're very much thinking about how do we make capitalism more inclusive, not because they're just do-gooders, but because they want to do well, i.e. bring it to the bottom line.
I'm curious the advice you would give to some of those C-suites who are navigating these choppy waters around DEI. We can start with Marty and come down. I see Carla shaking her head. Maybe we start with Carla.
I don't know. Go ahead.
No, I would just say, I say it as CEO of my own firm. I'm trying to make money. What you trying to do?
Yeah.
It's just very simple.
Yeah.
Like we get better decisions, find more opportunities, have more creativity, have a dynamic that sort of forces and facilitates collaboration because of all these different points of view. And it's just simple to me. And, frankly, it's okay if people are slow because I'm just going to build a firm, build a diverse firm, get the best talent, create an incredible environment, and make a lot of money. And it's simple. And I think if we frame it that way, just think about the low-hanging fruit in all of these sort of underserved communities. It's not just black and brown communities, but it's rural communities in this country, too. All of this opportunity that's sitting out there, we have to invest in it. It creates more for everybody. So we're just in the business of making money. And it's one of the important strategies. And I think if you just start hearing that song, I sing that.
Don't go there. Don't go there.
If you sort of hear that song or sing from that sheet of music over and over and over again, I think people will get it. Like, we're just trying to make money. And this is a way that we see that opportunity. So that's my point and my mantra from here out.
Carla, do you want to send your answer to us?
Yes, two arguments that I give to somebody in the C-suite. The first one is we are all competing around innovation. It is the dominant competitive parameter across all industries. And if you believe that, then here's your commercial imperative around DE&I. The first is that you need a lot of ideas in the room to get to that one innovative idea that will allow you to obtain and retain a leadership position in your industry. Because after all, innovation is born from ideas. Well, if you need a lot of ideas in the room, you need a lot of perspectives in the room, because ideas are born from perspectives. If you need a lot of perspectives in the room, you need a lot of experiences in the room, because perspectives are born from experiences. And if you need a lot of experiences in the room, you better start with a lot of different people in the room, because experiences are born from people. So you have to start with a lot of different people in the room in order to get to that one innovative idea that will allow you to obtain and retain a leadership position in your industry. That's the commercial imperative around DEI. My second argument is the following. When I walked out of the lauded halls of Harvard Business School in 1987, excellence in corporate America looked like 6 white men at the top. 6 white men at the top. Nothing strange about that. IBM, Exxon, GM, you pick it. So I knew that as a woman and a woman of color, if I wanted to play, I had to be comfortable being the first and the only in many, many rooms. But that is not the environment that millennials and Zers have grown up in, who, by the way, are the dominant population in the workforce. They have grown up in a very different environment where they have seen women lead. They might have a mother that's a CEO, or a mother who's driving the highest profile nonprofit in their city or town. They've gone to these elite schools where there's a smart black kid on the right, smart Hispanic kid on the left, smart Indian kid sitting in front of them, smart Asian kid sitting behind them. That's what excellence looks like. And if they don't see their definition of excellence in the organizations that they're thinking about joining, they won't go. And if they go, they won't stay. And that will now compromise your objective to be the employer of choice in your industry. And everybody likes to think that they are the employer of choice. So those are my 2 arguments that so far have been resonating with C-suite folks across all industries, because people are the assets that actually enable you to bring your products and services to the market. Without the right people, you can't do it. So those are the 2 arguments that I give to the C-suite.
From a leadership building and a culture building perspective, you spent so much time talking about this. You just finished a new book, Lead to Win.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the book and how you're thinking about it.
Yeah, I'll tell you, one of the reasons I wrote the book, I had no intentions of writing a leadership book because I thought only CEOs did that. But at the end of the day, during the crisis, I started getting so many calls from people in the C-suite who were saying, how do I lead in this moment? How do I motivate and inspire my people when we aren't in the same place? And I also realized that even before the pandemic, that we were in a very different environment than the one I built my career in. When I built my career, the leadership dynamic was the my way or the highway type style. As I like to joke, y'all know the joke, right? Your boss says jump, your answer is how high. But you say jump to a millennial, they say why, right? So it's a completely different dynamic. And here's the other thing, is that if you were a leader back in that day, it was never required that you bring your authentic self into the environment. And now your authenticity and your empathy was being demanded, if not required. So one of the things that I've been spending the last couple of years doing is traveling all over the world talking about what does it take to be a powerful, impactful, influential leader in today's context. And quickly, the things you have to be intentional about, as I call them, the 8 pearls: authenticity, building trust, creating clarity, creating other leaders, diversity, innovation, inclusivity, and voice. You've got to be willing to call a thing a thing.
Mm-hmm. Roger, you spend a lot of time. Oh, please clap for that. You spent time talking about empathy in the past and the power of it within running TIA. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm going to do that and then come back to build on some of the great wisdom we've already heard. So yeah, empathy is really important. When I started talking about leadership, Carla's got her messages. My messages around leadership it's around having some expertise. People don't want to follow an amateur. It's around clarity of where you're going, to be able to communicate clearly what the vision is. It's about fortitude, right? When you don't want your leader to be the first one to quake when things fall apart. And the last one is empathy, which is, if you're going to be a leader, you're leading people. People do not want to be treated like a cog in your machine. They want you to understand where they're coming from. I learned that lesson when I was leading the Fed's initial response on 9/11. I had people who were worried about their kids as I was worried about mine. Unfortunately, I had a colleague in New York whose father was in one of the towers, and she was trying to work with the Fed and sort of being very anxious about her father. So you need empathy. We just went through George Floyd, the crisis, the election, et cetera, the pandemic. People want to hear their leaders say, look, I understand where you're coming from. Doesn't mean I want to sort of quake. I want to be empathetic. But let me pick up on some of the other points that have been made. First, when in addition to what you've already heard about diversity, et cetera, I always remind people that it is not unusual for capitalists to think about these broader impacts. Henry Ford was one of the great capitalists in the world, and as you well know, one of the first things he did was raise the wages of his workers because he knew he needed consumers who could afford to buy his cars. So this whole notion of a living wage is not something that was created in 2017. It goes back to the very founding of the industrial era in America. And the final point I bring is sort of a more academic-y point of view, is if you think about anything in the natural world, you talk to any botanist, you talk to any theoretician, they will tell you that an ecosystem that is diverse is much stronger than an ecosystem that is a monoculture. For those who know anything about agriculture, if you only plant one crop, be it tobacco, be it cotton, be it anything else, you will soon deplete your land. If you rotate your crops, if you bring diversity to the field, if you bring diversity to any ecosystem, you will make it stronger. So in addition to everything else that's been said, there's just a lot of science behind all this. So, I think it's a pretty straightforward one. And the last thing I'll say is on the ESG thing. The reason you have to take that on board, as I started, I want to reinforce this. ESG, the failure to do that, is a risk factor. It is not a do-good factor. If you think about the economy, the companies in the U.S. that have gone under, poor governance has been one of the major issues. If you think about some of the biggest lawsuits that exist, and I'm a lawyer that has been driving companies bankrupt, think about poor asbestos out there. You think about a company where the family's reputation swung from superb to completely ruined, to be blunt, is the Sackler family and what happened around the opioid epidemic. So this whole notion of doing things the right way is not a do-gooder thing. It is a way to create longevity in your engine of profitability. And so, those are some of the points I'd make. Now, I'm not as articulate as Carla here, nor can I sing, but I can certainly try to be passionate about these things. I think
you got a killer jump shot, too.
I didn't want to go back there. I didn't want to go there because you guys want me to demonstrate, and then it'll be hard.
Listen, we have Chris Paul joining us later this week. I want to make sure.
We'll see.
Okay. I want to end with this and then start with Nisha. You all have spent time in public service, not always as elected officials. Roger on the Fed, Carla, the International Women's Corporation, you at the DFC, Nisha, Marty with working with President Obama. I'm curious of the power of working with public officials and how you all are thinking about it that way.
Well, that connection to mission, connection to impact is a powerful driver. How are we attracting a workforce of investment bankers and asset managers who are leaving jobs in the private sector to come into government? Because that ability to connect their expertise with the impact that they want to have in the world, with the mission that we have, is a powerful, powerful motivator. And I think, for young people coming into the workforce, no matter whether they're in the private sector or in government service, they are looking for that connection to mission that allows them to feel good about what they're bringing into the world.
Mm-hmm. Roger, what about you?
So 2 or 3 points. One is in any capitalist system, wherever you are, the government is a major player through regulation. Sometimes that regulation helps to save us. Sometimes it slows us down. Hopefully, it's more positive than negative. And so, first, the government is a player in the capitalist system, any place in the world, and so recognize that. Secondly, the government is incredibly powerful, and sometimes, at least the Fed, has been able to save the system. And obviously, I was honored to be part of the Fed during moments when we had to save the system. The final point I'd make is I've dealt with a lot of government officials around the world. One of the great strengths of America is that we have individuals from the private sector who go into the government and then come back out. Not true in the rest of the world. And that, I think, is one of the great strengths in terms of diversity of experience, in terms of really understanding how the system works. So anyone in this room who thinks, I only want to be in the private sector, et cetera, think about your moment to do government service. At local level, higher level, I will tell you, you'll be better off, at least I have been, and I think the government will be better off, be it local, state, federal. If you get to be the vice chairman of the Fed, then God bless you. because it's a way to contribute. And in having a government that works creates a stronger capitalism, I believe. So I think it's just all part and parcel of the same.
I like to say the revolving door is a feature and not a bug of the system.
I think so too. I get really pretty unhappy when people say, "Oh, the revolving door." That's how you learn. That's how you bring new knowledge
That's right.
and expertise into the government sector. Other societies, I'm going to stop at this moment, have sort of a legacy government bureaucracy that really doesn't understand the private sector. We've got great strength by having this revolving door.
And 30 seconds to Carla, 30 seconds to Marty.
I concur completely with Nisha and Roger. Nothing to add.
I'd just say that taking that one step further, we found in our firm, and Margaret would probably attest to this, who runs our real estate function, is bringing policymakers and business people together to collaborate, to share perspectives. I think capitalists have great attributes around innovation, creativity, efficiency, profit maximization, but policymakers have great attributes too around how to make a system run better, limit risk, protect the public. We found that by bringing those folks together and curating discussions, collaboration, we can find great investment opportunities that yield good outcomes for everybody over the long term, and that's part of the firm's secret sauce. So it's a unique environment here in the U.S., and opportunity to bring those folks together creates really good outcomes for us.
Awesome. I want to thank the new NBA star, Roger Ferguson, for joining us. Give Carla Harris, Marty Nesbitt, and Nisha Biswal a round of applause. Thank you all so much.